Over the years, Spider-Man has gone through numerous artistic changes, and the same can be said for the evolution of Spidey action figures. But nowhere was that seismic shift as great as when Todd McFarlane took over the artistic chores on The Amazing Spider-Man. Let's look at every attempt to capture Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man in action figure form and decide who did it the very best. Before becoming a comics, toy, and movie magnate, Todd McFarlane was a struggling artist, working part-time as a janitor while practicing his art late at night. After sending out over 700 submissions to every possible comics publisher, mostly straight rejections, but occasionally with some constructive criticism attached, he finally got his first comics job, a 1984 backup story in Coyote issue 11. Steady work with both Marvel and DC continued from there, and in 1988, McFarlane took over as the artist on Amazing Spider-Man with issue 298. The impact was instantaneous. From huge eyes to dynamic poses to spaghetti webbing, McFarlane took everything previously done on Spider-Man and turned it to 11. Marvel quickly adopted Todd's wall crawler as the house style. Other artists were instructed to ape McFarlane's Spidey, with varying degrees of success. His art was everywhere. Look at these McFarlane-style drawings on these early Toy Biz figures that barely resemble the character depicted on the card back. But even McFarlane himself continued to evolve in his depiction of the web spinner. His earliest issues, inked by the likes of comic greats such as Joseph Rubinstein, are significantly different from some of his later works where he was inking his own pencils. Which brings us to the action figures. When Toy Biz first started making Marvel figs in 1990, they tried comic-based versions, but as you can see, they had a lot to learn. With the release of the Spidey animated series in 1994, all efforts shifted to the animated style, and it wouldn't be until 1998 that Toy Biz returned to comic-style figures with the Flip and Trap Spidey. While this figure still shared the 5-inch scale and limited articulation of the animated line, that is where the comparisons stop. This was something completely new. No more of the rounded muscles of the cartoon. This Spidey was ripped. Every muscle was sculpted in exquisite detail. Just look at all those abdominal and oblique muscles. Gone were the static poses. This version of the wall crawler was twisting, contorting, with extended arms and long tapering fingers. Sure, the minimal articulation certainly limited the posing options, but the foundation for what was to come was there, like these ankle joints. Although mine has a little bit of paint bleed on this outstanding spider on the back of the suit, Toy Biz really crushed it with the sculpted-in web lines that were filled in with paint wash, which also helps to bring out the detail in the sculpt. And while this physique for our favorite wall crawler certainly echoes the thin, muscular lines of McFarlane's Spidey, just look at what they did with the eyes. There can be no doubt that these eyes, such a huge departure from previous figures, were meant to represent the unique style of Todd McFarlane. Never afraid to overuse a good thing, this sculpt was re-released several times, including this one with a slightly altered head, and again with an astonishingly accurate John Romita Sr. Peter Parker head sculpt, 60s flat top and all. Kind of an odd combination. But my favorite version was the Negative Zone variant, which had recently been a comic storyline at the time. Next up is what I consider one of the most important toys in the history of action figures, the original Spidey in the Spider-Man Classics line from 2001. And if you're wondering if this was meant to be a McFarlane Spidey, I mean, it comes with one of the most classic issues from his run on the titles, so yeah. Boasting over 30 points of articulation, this figure was a total game changer, combining the comic-accurate sculpting with virtually unlimited posability. And let's dig into that articulation for a minute. Sure, you've got things that have now become standard, like double-jointed knees and elbows, but these were revolutionary for the time. We get great range of motion from the ball shoulders and hips without sacrificing the lines of the sculpt, as we will see on the hips of some later figures. The diaphragm cut has good movement, but I really love the fingers, where the middle two move in unison, allowing for a classic thwippy pose, even with a tiny little spot of silver paint for the web spinners. We talked about the evolution of McFarlane Spider-Man art, and I think this figure best represents those earlier issues, like the one that it came with. Still fresh and revolutionary with those signature eyes, but not quite as detailed and sinewy as we will see soon. Much of this figure was reused for the Series 2 Battle Ravaged version. Again, the included comic and even the base both came straight from a Todd McFarlane Spidey story, and as you can see, this figure is an almost perfect recreation of Todd's art from his Torment storyline from the first issues of the adjectiveless Spider-Man title, which he both wrote and drew. But Toy Biz wasn't done. Thanks to the continuation of the Spider-Man Classics line, 2004 brought us this superposable wall-crawling Spidey. I made the claim in my Panels to Plastics video that this was the definitive McFarlane Spider-Man, so let's see how it stands up. Certainly, I think this represents the evolution of Todd's art. Whereas the original Spidey Classics figure had smoother, less defined musculature, this figure is a completely taut, wiry collection of muscle fibers, ready to spring into action. You can particularly see this in the legs, long and lean, and in all of the detail of the sculpting of the back, which has almost as much muscular definition as the abdomen. Back to those legs. This is a far more detailed sculpt. You can actually see the folds of Spidey's costume rippling around his leg muscles. Toy Biz continued to push the boundaries in terms of articulation, with varying degrees of success. All your favorites are here, including double knees and elbows, and a really strong ab crunch. This time, each individual finger is articulated, and while there's more dynamism to the individual fingers, the fixed thumb means the hands really only look right in a thwippy pose. I actually really like the way the butterfly joint was incorporated into the shoulders. It allows you to get his hands and arms across his body without messing up the lines of the sculpt. It's a really nice touch. The hips, however, are a step backwards. This ball joint at the hip does allow for full range of motion, but I'll never understand why these became the standard, as they clearly disrupt the look of the sculpt and are frankly quite distracting. Toy Biz again uses sculpted in web lines, filled in with a wash that's a bit uneven in places and kind of muddies the overall look of the figure a bit. But they finish strong with a head sculpt that is ripped from the pages of Todd's later Spider-Man work. It's the eyes, of course. But also unique to this figure is the profile, where the nose flows down to that classic sharp-pointed chin. No other figure before or since has done this as well as this one does. Yeah, this one kind of shocked me too, but I was digging through my Spidey box and I bumped into this figure. I've always sort of considered this Spidey to be more of an accessory than an actual figure, as he came with 2005's Marvel Select Dr. Octopus, but I guess he did receive equal billing on the packaging. Marvel Select 7-inch scaled figures started out as glorified statues, but have evolved into spectacular figures, combining excellent sculpting with functional articulation. This Spidey was at the midpoint. The sculpt is tight. Strong, lean muscles with costume details and folds included. Really great McFarlane eyes with nice, thick black outlines. Sculpted web lines and a pretty tight paint wash. Not bad, really. Then, the articulation. This is about as weak of an attempt at ball-jointed shoulders as you will ever see. And then, these hips are straight out of a Kenner 1970s Star Wars figure. Still, you basically got two figures for the price of one, and you could slot this guy into your Spidey display without any shame. But for me, I still think of him as more of a transition piece than anything else. Now for the one you've been waiting for, the Mafex Spider-Man. And yes, we're going to check out all three versions. The first comic Spidey from Mafex was number 75 in 2019. Looking at the promo art for this figure, you would assume it is the greatest wall crawler ever made. And it's close. The figure itself is gorgeous. For me, it hits that sweet spot between the first Spider-Man Classics figure and the later more muscular figures. But there's still plenty of muscle here. It's just subtle. I really appreciate the smoothness of this design. The colors on this original Mafex figure pop. The metallic blue has a nice shine to it, and that sets it off nicely from the more flat red color. But that's also where this figure gets a small minus from me. Much like those early Toy Biz figures, this one has sculpted web lines filled in with a black wash, which unfortunately is a little uneven, leaving some muddy areas like this around the shoulders and the abdomen, and then some areas with minimal wash like here on the chest. But none of this keeps this figure from being the one that I built my Spider-Man display around. This figure sold out in a hurry and quickly led to numerous bootleg knockoff versions. So in 2020, Mafex released number 108, the comic-colored version. It's the exact same figure, just worse. Look, I've read a lot of comics in my day, and none of them are colored like this. It's kind of like they took the cell shading ideas that we've seen with recent Marvel Legends animated figures and said, yeah, we can make that a lot crazier. I mean, does he really need this much highlighting on his butt?
That is America's ass.
It also suffered from some of the same wash problems as the first one, as you can see here across the chest. So what did Mafex decide to do next? They fixed everything. Oh baby, this is what I'm talking about. This brand new Spidey figure, numbered 185, fixes all the problems from the previous figures. Gone is the metallic blue, which I did actually kind of like, but I love the flat blue against the flat red even more. It really makes this feel like it stepped right off the comic page. The articulation continues to be smooth as silk, and it holds its poses really, really well. You can achieve those crunchy McFarlane poses. I mean, I could sit here and fiddle with this thing for hours on end and never get bored. And actually, that's exactly what I've been doing with it ever since I got it. But where this figure is leaps and bounds better than its predecessors is with the paint wash. It is so smooth and even. It keeps the reds bright and the colors consistent. If I had to nitpick just a little, the waist piece runs a little high and can cover up Spidey's belt in certain poses. And I also really don't see the need for this extension of the mask under the chin. I think the figure would have looked just fine without it. But that's it. For my money, this is the very best Todd McFarlane Spider-Man figure ever made. But what do you guys think? Did I leave a figure out? Let me know in the comments. And as always, give this video a like. And for the best in comics history and action figures, subscribe to Carbon Scoring.